So what about history? How does the Bible stand up to the historic test? It may surprise you to find out that the Bible has been substantiated by almost every archaeological dig ever done and proven to be absolutely infallible.
Jericho is where the Bible says the walls came tumbling down. In the 1930s, archaeologist John Garstang dug here, followed by the work of his colleague Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. Garstang concluded that the archaeological evidence he found here matched the biblical account. But Kenyon said no. She said that at the time the Bible says the Israelites attacked Jericho, there was neither a city nor even walls here at the time.
There's no archaeological evidence in Jericho.
The wall is Middle Bronze Age and it has nothing to do with the Late Bronze Age. It has nothing to do with the coming of the Israelites.
If you go to Jericho, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. Problem, there's no wall.
Who established that dating for Jericho, was it?
Kathleen Kenyon, who excavated.
My name is Peter Parr. 50 years ago I worked with Kathleen Kenyon on the Jericho excavations. She was someone I admired and she was my boss. But we got on well.
Also joining us is Dr. Bryant Wood, who is in the process of publishing his analysis of the pottery from both Garstang and Kenyon's digs at Jericho.
I completed my doctoral studies, and the subject of my dissertation was Canaanite pottery of the Late Bronze Age. Well, you might say, that sounds pretty boring. What would Canaanite pottery of the Late Bronze Age have to do with the Bible? Well, it turns out that we have to use pottery for dating. And dating is crucial for correlating what you're finding in an archaeological excavation with history.
Behind me here is what archaeologists today call a tell. Today, through excavation, they know this is where people lived, this is where ancient cities were. So, I mean, to help us understand a tell, I mean, could you kind of look at it as a cake?
A layer cake.
A layered cake.
Yes, many, many layers.
I think of a nice jam sponge cake that my wife makes. Very nice.
So we are making a cake to better understand a tell, and just like a tell, a cake is made up of different layers.
And a city would be abandoned or destroyed, and then they would come onto the ruins and they would build another city over the top, and then another one over a long period of time. Different cities would be built on top of each other until you have these unnatural looking hills like this, today called a tell. This is an example of one that has never been excavated.
And when you begin to dig into this tell, you go down through it layer by layer as you get down to the earlier and earlier and earlier cultures.
Just as we can now cut open our cake to expose the inner structure of our cake, so archaeologists dig into a tell to expose the inner structure of the layer system within a tell.
That's a very good description, except archaeology is not a piece of cake.
These 2,200-year-old texts that were discovered here in cave number 4 were hand-copied from even earlier manuscripts, and they are our best source for what happened at Jericho in the ancient past. This is cave number 4.
This is cave number 4. Yeah, right out of this very section came sections of the book of Joshua, the sections we have from Qumran.
And so how important do you think it is to use the biblical text and the archaeology that's been done at Jericho to interpret what's been found there?
Well, it's extremely important because, one, it's an historical document.
Really, the only ancient text that you have to work with for here is the biblical text, right?
The biblical text, yes, yes.
We have no other references to Jericho outside the Bible.
And no other Old Testament book has more historical information about Jericho than the book of Joshua. In regards to Jericho, it is important for us to understand that the book of Joshua is our only voice from the ancient past that speaks of what happened there over 3,000 years ago.
The Bible's an ancient text, and the book of Joshua is an ancient text, and so we know the story in the book of Joshua is an ancient account. So when the archaeologists excavated at Jericho, did they find evidence that matched that text or not?
In 1907, a German team began the first major excavation work at Jericho.
They were able to trace around the outside perimeter of the tell the lower retaining wall that holds in place the earthen embankment around the tell.
This short section of stone wall can still be seen at Tel Jericho today. But what was the purpose of a retaining wall like this one?
When I pour this bucket of dirt out, it spreads out across a flat ground. However, if I make a circle of stones and I pour the bucket of dirt into it, then the dirt is retained by the stone wall surrounding it.
This is the stone retaining wall which held in place the earthen embankment that surrounded the city, and on top of the stone retaining wall was the mud brick wall.
On top of this stone foundational retaining wall, there was another wall, the city wall, which was made out of mud bricks.
The three teams that dug Jericho were the German team from 1907 to 1909, John Garstang in the 1930s, and Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. Using the excavation reports from these three digs, we were able to reconstruct what the city of Jericho would have looked like in the time of Joshua. Both the stone wall and the mud brick wall on top of it made up the outer wall that surrounded the city. Further up the embankment was another mud brick wall.
And so as the Israelites were marching on the outside here where we are, this is what they were looking at. This stone facing wall, this big high mud brick wall, the embankment, another mud brick wall up on top. And so as they marched around, they must have been thinking, how are we going to capture this city? Because it's so strongly fortified. And on the seventh trip around, we're told in the Bible, the mud brick wall collapsed and it fell outward and down to the base of the stone retaining wall. And when the archaeologists dug in this area, they found this pile of mud bricks all the way along the retaining wall.
So where I am right now is where the pile of red bricks were found.
That's correct.
The Germans, Garstang, and Kenyon all found these piles of collapsed mud bricks while excavating at the base of the stone retaining wall.
Then she shows that she dug down the side of that the outside of that revetment wall, and then there were reddish collapsed bricks that she said came from the top of that stone wall.
Yes. Which is another reason to suppose that these weren't, there were walls on top. They're not in situ, but the collapsed brick has come down, yes. If you have a brick wall sitting on top of a stone revetment and it falls over, where else can the bricks go? They've got to go to the bottom.
And so with that pile of bricks, what does that tell us? Does that tell us that there was a destruction of the wall?
Certainly. It certainly is evidence of that destruction.
These fallen bricks from the city wall can be seen in this diagram from Kenyon's excavation report. In her write-up, she makes it clear that it was not the stone retaining wall that fell, but rather the mud brick wall that once stood on top of it.
And so she writes that up in her report, that here we have a collapsed city wall. And here's the evidence for it.
The archaeological understanding of how the walls of Jericho fell matches well with the ancient description of the wall falling beneath itself.
This find of a collapsed city wall found here at Jericho is unique in archaeology. At no other site have we found evidence for a city wall that has fallen down.
Yes, there were remains of the mud brick that had fallen down. I mean, that wall came tumbling down.
So the Bible says that the wall came tumbling down. The archaeologists then came and dug Jericho, and what did they find? They found a collapsed city wall. This fits perfectly with the description from the ancient text.